My parents treat my siblings' kids differently than mine. When I asked why, my mother scoffed. Well, we can't waste money on just anyone. My husband pulled out the receipts. Interesting, because last year you spent $10,000 on their private school while our son got nothing. Silence filled the room. I never wanted to believe my parents played favorites. It's one of those things you hear about in other families, but you convince yourself it could never happen in yours. I told myself that for years, even when the signs were right in front of me. Looking back, I should have seen it sooner. But when you grow up with something, it's hard to recognize it as anything other than normal. My name is Delia Harper, and this is how I learned the hard way that sometimes, the people who are supposed to love you the most are the first ones to betray you. It all started with something small. Milo's 7th birthday. We weren't doing anything extravagant, just a little party in the backyard with a few of his school friends. I had spent the morning blowing up balloons, decorating the patio, and making sure everything was perfect. Patrick, my husband, was in charge of grilling, and the kids were already running around with their little party hats, chasing each other with foam swords. My parents arrived late, which wasn't unusual. My mom, Teresa, walked in first, dressed in one of her usual pristine outfits, a crisp white blouse and slacks, as if she had somewhere more important to be. My dad, Richard, followed behind her, carrying a gift bag that I knew immediately wasn't for Milo, because I'd seen that same bag before. A month ago, at Carter's twins' birthday party, I had watched my parents arrive at my brother's house with that same designer bag filled with gifts. I remembered because I had sat there, biting my tongue as I watched them pull out an expensive tablet, brand new clothes, and a $500 check for their future. And now they had shown up to my son's birthday with nothing. I told myself it didn't matter, that Milo wouldn't notice, that he was happy just having his friends here. But it did matter, because this wasn't the first time. Still, I smiled and greeted them, pushing that familiar sting of disappointment down. Hey, glad you could make it. Of course, Mom said, kissing my cheek like everything was fine. Wouldn't miss our grandson's birthday. I glanced at my dad, who gave me a stiff nod before turning his attention to Patrick, making some small talk about the grill. We went through the motions. My parents sat at a table, eating and chatting with some of the other adults. My mom acted interested in everything but Milo, asking about my cousin's new job, commenting on the weather, even making small talk with my neighbor. But whenever I tried to bring up something about my son, his love for dinosaurs, the way he had just won a reading contest at school, she'd nod vaguely and change the subject. I told myself I was imagining it. But then gift time came. Milo sat in the center of the patio, unwrapping presents while the other kids gathered around him. He was grinning ear to ear, laughing as he tore through the paper. From Patrick and me, we got him a Lego set he had been asking for. From his friends, he got a mix of toys, books, and some handmade cards. And from my parents? Nothing. Not even a card. I watched as my mother sipped her lemonade, completely unfazed. My father was busy looking at his phone. Neither of them acknowledged the fact that they had brought nothing for their only grandson's birthday. And that's when it hit me. They didn't forget. They just didn't care. I let it go that day. I wish I could say it was because I was the bigger person, but the truth was, I didn't know how to bring it up without sounding bitter. So I let it sit. But then Christmas rolled around. And that was when I finally stopped pretending. We spent Christmas Eve at Carter's house, which had become a tradition. His twin daughters, Layla and Sadie, were practically bouncing off the walls with excitement. My younger brother, Wesley, was there with his son, Max. And, of course, my parents were showering them with gifts. I sat on the couch, watching as they handed out presents wrapped in elegant gold paper. Layla and Sadie each got brand new winter coats, designer sneakers, and a stack of books my mom had personally picked out. Max got a remote control car and an envelope filled with cash. Milo? Nothing. I clenched my jaw, willing myself to stay calm. But Patrick? He wasn't having it. He leaned over and whispered, "Are you seeing this?" I swallowed hard. Yeah, I had seen it for years. After dinner, I finally worked up the nerve to say something. "Mom," I said casually, "I noticed you got some really nice things for the kids this year." She smiled proudly. "Well, of course. They deserve it." I raised an eyebrow. "And Milo doesn't." A beat of silence. She blinked, clearly caught off guard, before letting out a light laugh. "Oh, honey, you know we love Milo. It's just, well, Carter and Wesley's kids need a little extra help." I stared at her. "Help? How?" She waved a hand dismissively. "Private school is expensive, and you know Carter has a lot on his plate. And Wesley, well, he's a single dad. We just want to make sure the kids have everything they need." Something about the way she said it made my stomach turn. "So, Milo doesn't need anything?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. She gave me a thin smile. "You and Patrick are doing fine. You don't need help." That was it. That was the moment everything clicked. It wasn't about the grandkids. It was about me. It didn't matter that Patrick and I weren't struggling. It didn't matter that we worked hard to give Milo a good life. What mattered was that in my mother's eyes, I was less deserving. Because I wasn't Carter. I wasn't Wesley. I was just Delia, the daughter they never really cared about. And the worst part? I let them do this to me. I let them make me feel unworthy. But not anymore. Because Patrick? He had been quiet long enough. And he had receipts. He pulled out his phone and placed it on the table. The screen lit up with bank transactions, my parents' bank transactions. My mother frowned. What's this? Patrick's voice was calm, but firm. Interesting, he said. Because last year, you spent $10,000 on Carter's kid's private school while Milo got nothing. The room fell into absolute silence. My father cleared his throat. Carter and Wesley suddenly found their drinks very interesting. And my mother? She scoffed. Well, we can't waste money on just anyone. The words hit me like a slap to the face. Just anyone. My son, her grandson, was just anyone to her. And that was when I knew. I was done. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I could hear the faint hum of Christmas music playing in the background, the clinking of glasses from the kitchen, the distant laughter of the kids playing in the next room. But in the dining room, silence. Patrick sat back in his chair, his face unreadable as he waited for my parents to respond. Carter shifted uncomfortably, rubbing the back of his neck. Wesley took a slow sip of his drink, eyes darting between me and our mother, like he wasn't sure which side of this he was supposed to be on. But my mother? She gave me that look I had seen my entire life. The one that said I was making a scene, that I was the problem, that I was being difficult again. She set her fork down neatly on her plate and took a slow, deliberate breath. Oh, Delia, she said, her voice carrying that familiar exasperation. Why are you acting like this? I felt Patrick stiffen beside me, but I placed a hand on his knee under the table, a silent message. Let me handle this. I folded my arms. Like what? Like we don't love Milo, she said smoothly, giving a tight-lipped smile like she was speaking to a child throwing a tantrum. Like we're being cruel. I held her gaze. Aren't you? She let out a short, humorless laugh. Oh, please. Just because we help Carter and Wesley a little more? A little? Patrick cut in, his voice low. He tapped the phone screen, scrolling. I see 10,000 for their tuition, 4,000 for their extracurriculars, another 5,000 for Layla and Sadie's summer camp. And, oh, here's a fun one. $3,000 towards Wesley's home renovation. He looked up, eyebrows raised. But you couldn't even buy Milo a birthday present? Dad cleared his throat. That's different. I turned to him. How? He looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. Carter and Wesley. He hesitated, like he was searching for the right words. They need us more. The words stung more than I wanted to admit. I laughed under my breath. So, because Patrick and I don't ask for money, Milo gets nothing? Delia, don't be dramatic, Mom sighed. It's not about Milo. It's about you. You don't need help. There it was. The truth. Patrick let out a dry chuckle, shaking his head. Unbelievable. But I wasn't laughing anymore. I leaned forward, staring straight at my mother. So, because I don't need you, you don't care about my son? Oh, stop, she said, rolling her eyes. Of course, we care about him. Then prove it, I shot back. When was the last time you asked about his school? His hobbies? His friends? She opened her mouth, then closed it. I waited. Nothing. I nodded slowly. Yeah, that's what I thought. Patrick sat up, looking straight at my dad now. And you? You've always been quiet about this, but you go along with it. Do you even like your grandson? My dad frowned. Patrick, don't be ridiculous. Patrick shrugged. I don't know. You've never really acted like you do. Dad's face turned red, but he didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He just sat there. That's when Wesley finally spoke. Look, maybe you're overreacting a little, he said carefully, avoiding my eyes. Mom and Dad aren't saying Milo doesn't matter. They just, I don't know. They've always helped Carter and me more because you're a man? I snapped. The words hit harder than I expected, and Wesley flinched. I hadn't meant to say it out loud, but now that I had, I realized how deeply I believed it. I had spent my whole life watching my parents bend over backward for my brothers, helping them with school, with their first apartments, with their weddings. Always making excuses for them, always coddling them. And me? I was the one who was supposed to be strong, the one who didn't need anything, the one they never worried about. And now, it has trickled down to my son. Milo didn't get the same treatment because I had never gotten it. My mother sighed like I was exhausting her. Delia, don't make this about something it's not. I turned to Carter, whose face was unreadable. You knew about this? He hesitated, then shrugged. I mean, yeah, they've always helped out. Helped out. I repeated, stunned. You let them pay for your kids' school while they ignored mine, and you didn't think that was messed up? Carter's jaw tightened. What was I supposed to do, Delia? Say no. I scoffed. I don't know. Maybe stand up for your nephew. Carter looked away. That told me everything I needed to know. I turned back to my mother. You do realize that when Milo grows up, he's going to remember this, right? He's going to remember that his grandparents never cared about him. My mother gave me a pointed look. Don't be ridiculous. Milo is a child. He doesn't understand things like this. Patrick let out a short laugh. You really think kids don't notice? He already knows. Her expression flickered, just for a second. Guilt. But just as quickly, she buried it. Well, she said stiffly, dabbing her mouth with a napkin, I'm sorry you feel that way. I let out a slow breath. There it was. The classic non-apology. I'm sorry you feel that way. No, I'm sorry we hurt you. No, I'm sorry for treating your son differently. Just another way of saying, this is your problem, not ours. I felt something inside me crack. I wasn't sure what it was, but I knew it wasn't fixable. Patrick put his hand on my back, a silent question. Are you ready to leave? I was, but I wasn't done yet. Because they needed to understand, really understand, what they had done. I sat back in my chair and exhaled. Okay. My mother raised an eyebrow. Okay. I nodded. Okay. Patrick gave me a sideways glance, but I ignored it. Because I knew exactly what I was about to do. I just wasn't sure if they were ready for it. The drive home was quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. The heavy, suffocating kind. Patrick kept one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting on my knee, his thumb tracing slow circles against my jeans. He didn't say anything, and neither did I. There was nothing left to say. I stared out the window, my thoughts racing. I should have expected this. My parents had always treated me like an afterthought. So why did I think they'd be any different with my son? And yet, the realization still hurts. But I wasn't going to sit in that hurt. No, I was going to do something about it. By the time we pulled into the driveway, I had made up my mind. The first step of my plan was simple: distance. No dramatic announcement. No screaming or cutting ties in a way that they could twist into me being overly emotional or immature. Just silence. I stopped reaching out. Stopped sending them pictures of Milo. Stopped inviting them over. At first, they didn't even notice. Weeks passed. Then months. They made no effort to see Milo or check in. No calls, no texts. It was proof. Hard, undeniable proof that they didn't care unless I was the one putting in the effort. And I was done putting in the effort. The real revenge, though? That came next. See, my parents had built their entire identity around being the perfect grandparents. They bragged about Carter's kids at every social event, posted pictures of Wesley's son online like they were the most doting grandparents in the world. I decided to hit them where it hurt. Public perception. I didn't do anything drastic. I just started being honest. When family friends or distant relatives called and asked, "How are your parents?" I answered truthfully, "Oh, we don't talk much anymore. They aren't really involved in Milo's life." I didn't say it with anger. Didn't badmouth them. Just stated it plainly. And people noticed. The whispers started. Aunt Diane, Mom's best friend, called me one day, her voice tight with concern. "Sweetheart, I heard from someone that your parents don't see Milo much. Is that true?" I smiled as I stirred my coffee. "Yeah, pretty much. They're really involved with Carter and Wesley's kids, though." A beat of silence. Then, "Oh," and that "oh" carried weight. Because Aunt Diane was a talker. And she wasn't the only one. By the time the next holiday rolled around, the damage had been done. I knew it the moment I stepped into Carter's house and saw my mother's face. She looked uncomfortable. Not because she had suddenly grown a conscience. No, if that were the case, she would have apologized. She was uncomfortable because people were talking. Because her friends, her relatives, her social circle, the people she loved impressing, were looking at her differently now. And she hated that. I saw the way she kept glancing at me during dinner, her lips pressed into a tight line, like she was debating whether or not to say something. I let her squirm. Patrick leaned in, whispering in my ear, "She looks like she's about to explode." I smirked. Let her. She lasted until dessert. Then, finally, she snapped. "Delia," she said, a forced smile plastered on her face. "Can I talk to you in private?" Patrick gave me a questioning look, but I squeezed his hand under the table. "I've got this." I followed her into the kitchen, crossing my arms as she turned to face me. She got straight to the point. "I don't appreciate you telling people we aren't involved in Milo's life." I arched an eyebrow. "Oh, is that not true?" She faltered. "Well, it's not that simple." "It is, actually," I said. "You've made it clear where Milo stands in this family. I just stopped covering for you." Her eyes flashed. "You're making us sound like bad grandparents." I tilted my head. "Aren't you?" She asked in a sharp breath. "That is not fair." I laughed. "Fair? You want to talk about fair? Where was fairness when you spent thousands on Carter and Wesley's kids while completely ignoring Milo?" She pursed her lips. "That's different." "Why?" She hesitated. And that's when I knew she had no real answer. Just excuses. Justifications. I took a step closer. "You don't like how people are seeing you now, do you? You don't like the fact that your friends know the truth." She stiffened. "I don't see why you had to go spreading." "I didn't spread anything. I cut in. I just stopped lying." She swallowed hard. I could see it in her face. The frustration, the desperation. She wanted to argue. Wanted to win. But she had nothing. So she sighed. Softened her voice. "Delia," she said, "we can fix this. Let's just move forward. You're making this bigger than it needs to be." I shook my head. "No, Mom. I'm finally seeing things exactly as they are." Her face fell. For the first time in my life, I had the power in this conversation. And she knew it. I turned to leave, but paused in the doorway. By the way, I added, Milo's doing great. Not that you asked. I didn't wait for her response. Because I didn't care anymore. I won't pretend it didn't hurt. Cutting ties with family, even toxic family, is never easy. But you know what? Milo is happier now. Patrick and I built a life without conditional love, without the weight of trying to impress people who never truly valued us. And my parents? Well, they have their reputation, and their whispers, and their regret, because I was done making excuses for them. And nothing scared them more than people knowing the truth.